Trevor, and Willie. Today, we have a special guest on the podcast we'll introduce a little bit later, but it is Baker Dunleavy. But before we start talking about Baker, I want to know, fellas, how we doing? Chris, I hear you're on the West Coast. How's it going out there?
It's 8:30 in the morning. I've subbed out the beers for the coffee, so I'm doing good. There's a Dunkin' right there, and if you know me, I'm a Dunkin' person. So
go to the West Coast.
I got my Dunkin' iced coffee. I'm good.
You get Dunkin' Donuts, which you can get anywhere in America when you go to the West Coast, and they have, I don't know, I think they have good coffee. I'm not a coffee drinker.
Chris can't help but pander to the Providence and Yukon people from New England.
As we said, this is a Yukon podcast. As mentioned, Baker will be on the podcast, and we'll be pulling him in a little bit shortly. Just so you all know and everyone's kind of aware of the conversation, what we're going to be talking about today is going to be a little bit just like of a conversation around the state of the program, where things are going, getting some of those questions answered. There are some things that we're not going to be able to discuss due to NCAA rules and regulations. So I know you all probably want to know, but we're not going to be able to talk about specific dollar amounts. I'm sorry. You're not going to be able to see the bank account. You can't see the Friends of Nova bank account. It's just not going to happen. We're not going to be able to talk about specific players that we might be targeting or maybe not be targeting in the portal. We can talk about them if anything happens, but Baker can't. That's just due to NCAA rules and regulations. This is why we're not an NCAA regulated podcast, and we're just having a little bit of fun. We're just some jabronis having a good conversation with a really key part of Villanova basketball. Chris, Trevor, anything else that you guys are thinking about here?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're doing our best. We like Baker and the program has a sense of what the content that we want to talk about is. Knowing that they've agreed to do this, I think it's, I've got a bunch of commentary from folks that have said, hey, I think this is a good step for the program that they're engaging with you guys. I tend to agree with that, obviously, because we post this podcast, but I think it's good. I think there's a recognition out there that there's a desire to interface with the fan base a little bit differently. And I think this is maybe a proof of concept. So I'm looking forward to it. I kind of don't want to waste any more time. I think people are here for a reason.
To see me.
Yes, that's exactly it.
I'm here. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I don't think we should waste any more time.
No, we're going to kick it to a quick.
Today's episode of the Full 40 is brought to you by HomeField Apparel. HomeField produces some of the best quality vintage collegiate apparel on the market. You won't find better game day gear anywhere else. HomeField has the ultimate collection of old school logos and looks with the best quality around. Shop t-shirts, crew necks, hoodies, bomber jackets, and more at homefieldapparel.com. Don't forget to use code NOVAINSIDER for 15% off your first purchase. That's code NOVAINSIDER at homefieldapparel.com.
Awesome. Well, we are joined here today by Baker Dunleavy, General Manager of Villanova men's and women's basketball. Baker, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. I wanted to start just with Chris's intro on his coffee choice. Wanted to shout out the ladies at Holy Grounds here on campus. Always and between the Bartley Exchange and Connolly Center, we got the finest coffee here on campus. So shout out to the ladies over there. But yeah, happy to be here with you guys. Appreciate you having me.
No, it's great to have you here too. I totally forgot about Holy Grounds, just being off campus. Once you said it, I was like, holy crap! I haven't been to Holy Grounds in 8 years now. That's a good pick.
Yeah, man, they take points, meal plan. Yeah.
I know we can't talk about NIL dollars, but Baker, how many points do you have on your card?
Ooh, that might even be a more sensitive subject. Yeah. It's it's something you got to battle for each semester, but right. It's very, very valuable.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining, Baker. I guess we can just kind of get started into some of the questions here that we wanted to talk about. I think the first thing we want to discuss is this is the general manager role is new to Villanova, new to NIL, or new to NCAA, and kind of coming into the NIL world. What prompted this decision to come back to Nova, leave your job at Quinnipiac, and come back to Nova to take a GM role in a role that we're still defining?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's being built. It's the things that need to be done are being built, and the role itself is being built, which is pretty exciting. And honestly, I'm super fortunate to be the one able to be picked to do it. But I would say this time last year, coaching my team at Quinnipiac, really had a wonderful year. Enjoyed coaching my team. won 20 games, felt a level of success, felt really good about it. We had some momentum, a lot of guys coming back. So, my mind was strictly on that. And I remember, kind of like similar to what we're going to talk about today in the portal, I was driving from Syracuse, New York back to Connecticut the day after we lost. It was literally the next day. I went to visit with a Syracuse transfer, and just having a couple of conversations in the car, just reviewing the season with Coach Wright, and just discussing kind of like the overall state of the game. And I think I made a comment like, I was enjoying it, but almost looking around to pivot into something else that wasn't exactly coaching. And he said, funny you should mention that, and started talking about kind of some of the needs that we had here at Villanova. And my wife and I are grads and love this place. Our first two were born during the NCAA tournament runs that we had in 14 and 17. So for us, it's such a special opportunity. So if you're going to say no, like, you may not get another opportunity. So we really thought about it. And it really didn't take much thought. It was the right thing for us to do. We felt we had a calling to come back. And again, we're just blessed and fortunate to be here.
Yeah. I mean, one, you left Quinnipiac in a good position. I know they're 3 points away from the NCAA tournament a couple weeks ago, which is a big bummer. But how's it been being back on the main line, just compared to your time in Quinnipiac? How's it changed in the last 3-4 years since you?
Well, you guys know. I mean, you guys graduated at different times, and you leave Villanova. No matter when you graduate, you come back. It's just different. I mean, obviously, when I went to school here and worked here, those parking lots were flat. No cornouts, no commons, right? I've had to learn a little bit about learn my way around. I think the infrastructure of the program. Credit to obviously Coach Wright, Coach Neptune, all the staff that's been here, and just keep building it. Coach Shack on the strength and conditioning side, now Justin McClellan, and probably more than anybody, Father Peter and Mark Jackson, just having the vision to keep this thing growing, even though we've been successful. So you just look around, and so much is. I mean, the Fit. I never coached in that beautiful new building. So so much has developed in a really, really positive way. But at the same time, you come back here and some things will never change. And that's, there's a lot of the same people here, the same attitudes, the same culture, the way people treat each other. It's almost like we've never left. We've really been embraced. And that feels really good.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think the question is, so coming back, you got that Connecticut traffic. How is the Connecticut traffic compared to Philly traffic, living that day in and day out?
Well, you guys, if you guys go up past New York, you feel like, hey, I drove through New York City. I'm good. Once you get on the I-95 corridor in Connecticut, that's like, if you're going to New England, that's the trickiest part, like for no reason, for absolutely no reason. The times in which they choose to do construction and it goes to 2 lanes. I'm putting Southern Connecticut up there with any city I've been in, besides where Chris is right now in LA. It's right there.
Yeah, it's I live up.
Other than that, a lovely place though. We love it.
I live up in Boston. Every time I drive down, I'm like, this is absolute Connecticut's a nightmare. I look at New York as actually a safe haven. Actually,
that's right.
I'm in New York finally.
Little known secret. Yeah.
All right. Well, Baker, so now that you've gotten back and you've kind of been in the swing of things for about a year here, kind of like walk us through your day to day. Like, what do you do?
Yeah, it's interesting. It really does depend on the time of year. There's such a cycle to it. And again, like you said, I'm finishing my first cycle. But when I jumped on board here, really May 1st of last year is when I kind of officially started. We were just already deep into the cycle of portal recruiting, roster retention, creating and shaping the roster for the following year. And really, it used to be for a coaching staff, April, May was the nice time of the year. You kick back, you go to the Final Four, hang with your fellow coaches. You see, you can actually watch the Masters, sit back and watch the Masters, hang out, enjoy your family. I will say, guys, this is the craziest time for any college coaching staff. I don't care if you won the national title or a rebuilding. It doesn't matter. This is the craziest 6 weeks you're going to have all season that doesn't involve competing on the court, for reasons we'll discuss. So at this time, my real role the whole calendar year is to make sure if our coaches can coach and recruit, they can spend most of their time coaching and recruiting, and a lot of the other stuff falls on my plate. to be able to allow them to be really efficient in their jobs, then that's where I evaluate, all right, I'm doing my job. I'm doing well. A huge part of my role is just to manage overall communication. We have different entities that need to be on the same page. Obviously, our players and our players' families, with the coaching staff, the collective, our administration, all the way up from Mark to Father Peter. Our alumni, our alumni and our donors are more involved in the program than ever, and that's a good thing. We've talked about that a lot. Like, we have to kind of open our doors post-COVID to our fan base, to our donors, because us being a great program going into the future is going to require more interaction than ever. So managing how that happens, when it happens, those things happening successfully is a big part of my role.
So as part of this role, obviously, I think there's the communication standpoint. What is your interaction with players and coaches? Kind of, what does that look like?
What's been the funny part is coming into this, and it's like an itch. You just can't help yourself. Like, I'm like institutionalized into coaching. That's what I'm trained to do, right? So, like, I'm at practice, and I'm sure our compliance coordinator is watching this. I never cross the.
I was about to ask.
I'm watching. I'm like, hey, like, what do you want to jump in there and coach? You want to do the things that you're trained to do, or your habits are geared for you to do. And that's been an interesting part of it. And I joke, but it hasn't been hard. My job is very clear. But a part of my job is to just spend time with our coaching staff and listen and evaluate and maybe, for lack of a better term, consult at times, or just be a somebody for them to be able to bounce ideas off of, a sounding board, a devil's advocate at times. So I do enjoy that part of it too, because I am a basketball junkie and a coach at heart.
Yep.
So those things come into play as well. And so it really is a really cool role that's been carved out here. I think part of the reason, I think we were probably publicly second to start this position. Duke was first.
Yep.
Duke hired Rachel Baker, who was an executive on the Nike grassroots side. And, she's terrific and really intelligent. And I think their branding and their off-court endorsement platform is second to none. And you can understand why she would be the one that they chose there. For us, I think it was really important to have somebody, whoever came into this role, that could hit the ground running, already having certain relationships and kind of familiar with all of our key personnel here, internally and externally.
You mentioned,
is there a rule that somebody has to have the name Baker in their name to be a GM?
I'm glad you said it, because I also thought it and
Yeah.
started laughing to myself.
Probably says a lot about me that I overlooked that. Yeah, no, I mean, I'll have to get with Rachel on that. We'll have to get some type of patent on the position. But no, I mean, they're obviously Duke. We respect them. They're very forward thinking, and they did it in their way. And I think you'll hear me talk about, and all of our people talk about, all this new stuff. You can kind of do whatever you want, honestly. Right. And again, our compliance coordinator probably doesn't want to hear that. But the NCAA has kind of opened it up and taken hands-off approach. So it's so important that we at least have a philosophy and some guidelines internally, just to kind of keep us all connected.
So just going back to Rachel, and how conversations with other GMs across men's and women's basketball gone? Are you all coming up with plans together? Oh, this is how we're handling it. How does that exchange of ideas look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I have a coaching network, and now in a new role, trying to build out a network that's more pertinent to what I'm doing. So
yeah.
The people I tend to talk to more are other GMs. I saw West Virginia hired a GM yesterday. Chris Ogden is a GM at University of Texas. He and I have known each other for a long time. We share ideas. What you really try to be honest, to be strategy is be as close to people who you don't recruit against often, so that there's actually a willingness to share real ideas. If we find ourselves recruiting as the same people all the time, for them to think that I'm going to give them honest feedback and try and help them and exchange ideas is probably unrealistic. So I've tried to create some relationships on the football side as well. They just do it at such a large scale and think outside the box. And then talking to a lot of agents, to be honest, there's more players represented by agencies right now, and a lot of information go through those guys as well. So it's just trying to more than anything, create a network of people who are willing to help you, and vice versa, that can be mutually beneficial.
With the sorry, just to jump in, the players that now have agents and everything like that, are you seeing that it's the same kind of names that are repping NBA talent as, you know, the same guys that would be taking these kids through the draft, or is it a new kind of you know, a new generation of agents kind of coming in, like guys that you don't know, but they're starting to sign all these kids in high school to take them through college, and now that they have the ability to monetize like that?
It's a great question. It's all the above. I will say it probably hasn't changed for the top 25 kids. The top 25 kids have their NBA agents, the priorities, the Excels, the Octagons, the CAAs, you know, and that probably has stayed the same. What's been really interesting is, like, beyond that, guys who are kind of fringe prospects or guys who are developing prospects. Some of them will go that route and have big time agents. Some of them will be the smaller guys who actually specialize more in the NIL landscape. When all this stuff started, there were a lot of like big time agencies that said, oh, we're not gonna deal with that. It's not a big enough market for us to spend our time on. And I think you see a lot of them changing their minds now. In both men's and women's basketball, you see a lot of marketing deals going to maybe athletes, especially on the men's side. Like, I think like Armando Bacot is a good example. Like, you're seeing him on like State Farm commercials. Like, great player. He's not going to be a lottery pick. He may not be a draft pick, you know, but getting national branding deals based on, you know, how big of a deal the NCAA tournament is and how visible they are. So I think agents look at that as valuable now. And to be honest, these are things that we 10 years ago wouldn't have touched. Obviously, it was illegal, and we had we had much more direct relations with our players in terms of everything they did on and off the court. And now we can't fight the fact that there will be some of these people involved, and they're business people, and we all know this is heading more towards a little bit more of a pro model. And so much of that stuff, it doesn't matter if we like it, we got to embrace it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think as we like talk about the structure of the role, it's obviously important to think about like how the current events that are happening at Villanova have affected things. Chris, I know you had a question that you wanted to hit with this one. I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I think obviously I think there's going to be a big focus from the listeners on kind of what the current state of affairs at Nova, and I do want to get on to the men's side, but I do want to start with the women's side, because actually, you know, the transfer portal has been happening a lot over the course of the last few weeks, and I think even though that we saw Brendan Hausen transfer, we saw Mark Armstrong put his name in the draft, we saw Eric Dixon enter the draft, and there's going to be some key departures from the men's side. I think Lucy Olson's transfer, I think, gutted a lot of people in the fan base, and so I was curious. I want to talk a little bit about that, and you know, just ask like, what are kind of the expectations of the women's program in your minds? Like, where are we going with the women's program? I think people are a little bit upset to see Lucy move on. And I've heard her name rumored at other programs. You know, definitely, clearly, there's a theme. Programs that have made Final Fours recently, et cetera, have been all in the rumor mill there. I know you can't comment specifically on that type of stuff, but I guess, like, what's your kind of message to fans who say, well, why can't we compete at that high level?
No, it's an important question, and I would first start by saying all of us. Although we respect Lucy and her family's decision, we feel the same way. You know, Lucy has had an incredible impact here. She's loved here. In my short time here, a year, I've gotten to know her and her parents very well, and have incredible respect for her just drive, competitive nature, but then like the way she represented in Villanova. So, you know, it stings. You know, you don't want to lose somebody of Lucy's caliber as a person or a player. I will say, this is one of those things where you come back 6 years later, right, and you see the state of this, like what Denise has done with that program. Part of the reason it hurts so much is because of how much momentum that program has.
Yep.
And so I think we're talking about something that's like being done the right way. So I think that's probably what we come back to, is like, we know that Denise is as good as it gets. We know that the assets being pushed towards women's basketball are higher than they've ever been here. We know that our collective has every single women's basketball player under contract for this past year and every year going forward, as long as that's part of our ecosystem. We know that Lucy's decision was not driven by the opportunity to earn from NIL based on a collective commitment. We know that Friends of Nova did an incredible job of with Randy and all of his people over there, making a very, very strong pitch to her. But at the end of the day, the theme is, whether it's Lucy, Brendan, anybody, the guys at Duke or Carolina who leave, it's really comes down to every spring now, and this isn't the way it was. Every individual player has a decision to make. The mobility is very, very high, the ability to be mobile. And the most important thing in any program now is that, like, when summer schools happens on June 1st, that the people in the gym are aligned. And how you get to that point, whether it's through retention of all 13 players or building a new roster, will change year to year. And it's not always going to be correlated to whether you won or not. Speaking to the men's program, like, there's nobody here that's excited about the way we finished this year or the results of this season. There's nobody here, coaching staff included, that would say, hey, we're really happy with the results that we had from a win-loss perspective. But I do think, we're going to have a lot of spots to fill on the men's side. The women will have their spots to fill as well. We're Villanova. We've got a lot to sell. We've got a lot to offer. And we've got to always look at that as opportunity as opposed to a threat. And that still doesn't change the fact that we want people like Lucy back, but we also have to change our mind set towards whether retention is always the gold standard. I think it's alignment becomes the gold standard with your players.
Just to hit on that last point there and bounce off of that, that retention versus alignment conversation. That's actually kind of an interesting dialogue that I've been playing out in my own head over the last couple of days and weeks. I think that there was, and this is me saying this, it felt like at the end of last year's season, and with the NIL and the portal, etc., we made a very big push on retention on the men's side.
And I'd say the same thing after Jade left.
Yeah, correct. Same thing is true after Jay left too. Exactly. Yeah, it's been a big push on retention. And it's interesting to hear you say, hey, like, alignment's more important than retention. Is that a learning from this past year, or is that the philosophy that's been in place, or is that something that the program is actively evolving on?
I think it's always been in place. I think when you have especially probably the last 10 years under Coach Wright, and more like 8, we had just a cycle of retention with a few exceptions, like a Dylan Ennis. We would have loved to have Dylan Ennis back for his last year. There was reasons for him leaving, but what a great guy, really good player. We would have loved to have him back. But we were in a rhythm to retain, but it was also the right strategy. When you have whether stylistic fits that don't happen, improvements that do or don't happen, a coaching change and a different vision for how the game should be played. We have guys obviously that were recruited to play for Coach Wright, and then Coach Neptune comes in and might have some different things he wants to do. So those things aren't positive or negative. They just are what they are. And our philosophy has to always been, like, let's be, in this time of year, open, honest, clear, so that, like, October, when real practice starts, nobody's looking around like, all right, I was told something other than what it is, as much as we can. And so I think it's always been a huge part of our recruiting philosophy here is to set an expectation that as coaches and as a program, we can live up to our players and families, knowing how hard we're going to push them, and knowing that trust is key. So you can't always be perfect in those areas, but I do think it's always been key. But, like, now it's just how you execute is so different. And I always say, like, I really mean this. I mean, there's certain guys that we love here at Villanova who are legends over the last few years. that we know didn't start as freshmen, maybe didn't even start as sophomores. And I remember being on the phone with Josh Hart doing a conference call with him and his dad when he found out that he was going to be the sixth man his sophomore year, and Josh was mad, really, really mad. And his dad couldn't have been more supportive and put him in his place, and said, that's out of your control. All right. You got to do what you can do at the highest level to control things. And he ended up being Big East tournament MVP his sophomore year. Right. So those are the stories we're so proud of. But if we really look back on it, and I'm using Josh as an example because it's such a clear-cut one, but if the path to leaving was as easy as it was back then, we might have had to reevaluate how we ran the program. That sit-out year really allowed us to stop players from having these thoughts as much, during times of adversity. And again, I'm not going to say Josh or any of those guys would have left, but we would have had to really reevaluate how we get aligned, and also how often, we have these conversations. So communication and getting on the same page and being honest is more important now than ever.
To that point, I think Dante and maybe even Mikhail have said that, if the portal was open back then, they probably would have, or they might have left, or they at least would have looked around and what have you. So.
I hate to speak for those guys, but I was here, Ashley Howard was here, Kyle was here. We remember it the same way, and it's really tricky to be successful if you can't have confrontation. Anything that you do, and now we need to still be able to have that push mentality, that confrontational, edgy mentality here at Villanova, and finding our ability to do that from a staff perspective to a player perspective. It's not a matter of if we need to be that way, because you watch the best teams, they play that way. It's how you get there, and the communication and the trust is paramount.
I guess on that note, how do you keep the accountability structure in place in that regard? It seems like, look, obviously as fans, you're looking at wins and losses, and less wins in a fan's mind means less accountability, understanding that sometimes it could mean that the ball just didn't go through the basket as many times. But I guess is the accountability structure the same? I'll ask that first. And then part two to that question is how do you give the sense that it's back to that level externally? Maybe I don't know if that question really.
No, I think it's you can go down a rabbit hole thinking about this. Oh man, now the transfer portal is open. There's NIL, guys being compensated for the name, image, and likeness. You want to perceive that oh man, now every player is lazy and entitled. That's just naturally what it's going to be. And I think that's not the way to think about it. I mean, we all have professional sports organizations that we respect that maintain a culture. Maybe not the same as Villanova, but you look at certain organizations and there's a way of there's standards, there's a way they treat each other, there's a way they operate that you look at all right, yeah, those guys get paid, but that's a team, and that's the highest level of transactional culture. I mean, that is literal professional sports, whether it's Miami Heat or whatever teams you might look up to in that way in different sports. The Patriots for a long time, obviously. We're not quite there. We're not all in on a professional model. We should be able to, and we can still define what we want our culture to be, even if it's slightly different with a new leadership regime. That part of it doesn't matter, but it has to be very intentional, and it is definitely doable. I think we're selling ourselves and young people short to say that's impossible just because they're getting a little bit of the cut now. But we have to be really thoughtful in our approach to how we go make it happen.
Sticking on that a little bit, it feels like there were, and granted, Jay's philosophy is going to be different than Kyle's philosophy. And I know you can't necessarily, Kyle can speak to himself on this regard. It feels like there would be moments sometimes in games, I don't want to get into necessarily specifics, where a given player might be loose with the ball or maybe showy in some regards or what have you, and it would lead to a turnover or something where, as fans, you know that if it was 5 years ago, it would be a yank out of the game and a screaming match on the sidelines, where it felt like maybe that wasn't necessarily there. Is that a philosophical shift from your perspective, or is that, hey, we're just trying to manage this new era and work with that? Or is it maybe in some regards a personality thing where, hey, in order to get the best out of a particular player, I have to let them be them to some degree?
I think all the above. I mean, again, I hate to speak for Kyle as far as like why he would take a guy out of the game. I'm not going to go there. But in terms of everything you just mentioned, I think those are valid thoughts. It's like, we're playing guys, some guys maybe more right now with a little bit more leeway on some of those things, clearly, to allow them to develop on the fly. I think you look at some of the guys, even Jalen Brunson, he was a starter his freshman year. He's he might be the MVP of the NBA, but we saw him at the end of games not playing his freshman year, like not on the court against North Carolina in the national title game. He's the most obvious example of guys that were just brought along intentionally slowly. Would we love to be able to do that and temper that? We would. That would require us to getting back on track in a recruiting cycle where there's old guys, young guys come up. I think all of us, and I think I feel confident speaking for our staff, would love nothing more than for that to be able to happen. I think why didn't it look like that last year? I think everything you mentioned could play into that. I think at some positions we probably didn't have great, I'm going to say, depth where we could afford to kind of bring guys in and out at times, especially during key injury moments of the season. We have certain guys you just got to ride them, got to play them, and at the expense of, all right, giving yourself the best chance to win. So I'm going to try and stay away from like minutes decisions and decisions. But I would say like the way our rosters were consistently structured, again, over the last 8 to 10 years, we always had the ability to have, especially at the backcourt positions, like that depth and to be able to move things around to where, playing time and being in the game is the greatest tool a coach has in terms of motivation and getting everybody on the same page. And that obviously has been a tool we've used at a high level here, especially as you compare it to watching other programs.
When you mentioned the kind of the idea of gaining trust, and like what I'm like kind of reading between the lines here, it kind of sounds like there's a level of, all right, with the way with NIL, the transfer portal, a way to gain trust is to like let people play through their mistakes more and keep them on the floor and say like, okay, we're giving you the keys. We're giving you the ability to stay on the floor. We're giving you the ability to play through mistakes, as compared to historically, not that we didn't let players play through mistakes in the past, but there was much more of a focused process on this is the process, this is the development, you're going to stay. There's going to be a person in front of you that you're going to be able to see. And if you make a mistake, that's fine, but we're going to put this other person back in so that you have that example that you can see, as compared to now where the examples are maybe not there. As you mentioned, there might not be the depth. And so it's more of a, okay, the trust we're putting in you, that equity that we're building alongside the player is that ability to say, hey, you made a mistake, you're staying out there. It was a stupid mistake, but this is how we keep going.
It's funny, like there's an old saying in coaching, it's like the players, their mindset, and it's all of them. It's not one guy. It's like, trust me, I'll show you, just trust me, I'll show you. And then a coach would say the opposite, like, show me and I'll trust you, and that is not something that is been created by portal and NIL. That's always been the case. And, here, this has been a meritocracy. It's not a democracy. It's not, hey, you're a senior now, you play 25 minutes, 30 minutes. It's over the course of your career here. You got to show it in order to earn it. And once you earn it, there's a trust there. Okay, you can play through some mistakes. I think that's the desired model here. In a situation last year with 4 grad transfers, 4 veteran transfers, some younger guys who hadn't been through it before, being as consistent with those things and making the optics kind of like resemble what it's been here, really difficult. But the reference point for our staff, and you're talking about, Mike Nardi, Dwayne Anderson, Ashley Howard, Kyle Neptune, the reference point they have on success is Villanova basketball, led by led originally by Coach Wright and now by Kyle Neptune. So it is the reference point. It is what they want to work back towards, knowing that it'll never look exactly the same, because it still has to come from, whatever you do as a program, it's got to come genuinely and organically through the head coach's mind and heart, and that's what we're kind of working to build towards.
So I guess kind of looking at getting into maybe a little bit of the specifics and nitty gritty without necessarily getting into names, dollars, because we know you can't share all that information, but just from a broad scale, I think there's a question out there as to like, hey, is our NIL position as competitive as it was last year? Is it more competitive? How do we look from a broader in the broader landscape? Like, do we have, maybe the question is maybe best said as, has the lack of on-court success impacted negatively our NIL situation, or are we increasingly competitive still?
That'll be a little bit of a lagging indicator as far as like we'll know more in a few months in terms of like year over year, in terms of fundraising and comparing it, right? It would be naive to think that having a subpar win-loss season wouldn't affect your ability to raise dollars. I would say we have some built-in advantages. Number one, obviously our tradition, our brand. Number two, we don't have football. I think we can be very efficient with what we do. The same for our Big East counterparts. We're really putting our resources towards women's basketball. And so in that sense, this past year we were very, very competitive. There's no full transparency as far as what other teams are doing, raising, spending. But, we know enough and do enough research and have enough of a network out there to understand kind of what the top tier teams are doing. And I think we're right there. I wouldn't say we're number one, but I think we're right there this past year. The trend, I would say, is as I'm, as our staff, we're navigating this. It feels like more schools are committed this offseason. There's more schools out there looking at last season and learning like, all right, we got to step it up. And so that has happened. Our ability to continue to do that, I think we feel really confident in, for no other reason that we have a select group of 4 or 5 really, really loyal Villanovans who have really backed us at an incredible level. So that's our floor right now. Not that we take that for granted and that it'll always be there, but right now those guys have been amazing. But the ceiling of your collective is going to be dictated by that next level, and by the convincing of your fan base that everything you can give matters. There's just so many people out here that you hear the figures out there, and they're big figures. And you say like, all right, well, my contribution doesn't matter. And being able to kind of battle that mentality a little bit and also try the best we can to separate it from win-loss, because you need to be consistent in this area. If you're going to have a bounce back year or that growth year, you got to keep chipping away at it and not be reactive and emotional as a program, as players. But then, now as a donor base, as a fan base, you guys are all, in this thing with us. So that's all easier said than done. We get it. But, we're lucky to have Randy Foy out there hitting the road, speaking to our people, getting people to understand what this stuff is all about in terms of NIL, how they can help, and why it's so important. So I will say the strength of this whole thing is our infrastructure. I would put up against anybody's in terms of having the roles necessary, being ahead of this thing, and being very, very efficient. We have one collective, and that's Friends of Nova. It's supported by our university at a high level. Our head of advancement, Kevin Noller, has been incredibly supportive. Father Peter, everybody. And you look around, some of these SEC football schools have 5-6 collectives competing over who gets to be the one to help the players, who gets to be the one to help get that next big recruit. And you don't even mention they're trying to build a new business school. The competition for those things can create some really negative situations. We've been really blessed to be aligned there.
Well, yeah. So on the competition front, I know that there is, Villanova is always trying to raise money for the university, and versus the NIL collective, I guess Villanova has grown its advancement and development department and has grown its percentage of alumni that contribute. significantly since I started on campus 20 years ago. But with that being said, do you feel like, hey, like you get a lot of pushback from certain people? Maybe they wouldn't give high dollar amounts. Like obviously some boosters have the amount of cash to be able to spread around, and that makes it easy on them from a decision-making process. But candidly, someone like me, who is, I donate, but like, I sit back sometimes and I say, well, okay, is it like, I got a budget and I got to allocate money accordingly. Like how do you have that conversation, and what's the conversation maybe even with the university in that regard, to say, like, how do we want people who are passionate about the university and the basketball program to be able to spread their funds around?
Chris, we're just basically asking you to just have one less meal a day. One less meal a day. Maybe, switch over to Coors Light instead of the expensive IPA you're buying. And the rest goes to Friends of Nova. No, I mean, I think, listen, we get it. Everybody gets it. At the end of the day, we look at it like, hey, this university is important to a lot of people. We look at our men's and women's basketball programs as and this is obviously a slanted take because we're in it, but kind of the front door step to the university. It's what a lot of people interact with for the first time when they learn about Villanova, whether it's on TV, at a game, whatever have you. And I think luckily our president and the top people here look at it the same way. They look at it as one of our most valuable resources, if not our most valuable branding resource. So that part of it is very straightforward. And we're sensitive to the fact that, hey, like asking for donations to anything. And there's a lot more important causes. We were at Coaches versus Cancer Gala last night. Our coaching staff, Coach Neptune, Coach Wright, Mark Jackson, and to hear some of the stories that come out of that, and they're asking for support there. Those are easy conversations, right? And then you get down to kind of that next tier of like, hey, supporting university. And if through supporting Villanova, if this place matters to you a lot, it's really important to you, and you're a believer that the basketball programs here are a driver of that. If you're in the mode right now to want to help our programs, the best way to do it is by helping the collective in this moment. Now, as court cases are lost by the NCAA and the landscape shifts and lawsuits are happening and regulations, if that changes, then we'll address it over time. But all we can do is really live in this particular moment, and those dollars being purposed towards Friends of Nova is really important to our department and our teams.
Do you have so it's good to hear that the collective is in a good position from as Randy likes to call it, the war chest perspective. It's good to hear that. Would you say that's, and I know you said that the women's team has every player under contract. Is that is the situation strong for both programs? Like, are we capable of supporting both programs, or are the funds more earmarked to the men's side, or does once it go to the collective, it's for their use and their decision making?
No, we're really competitive on both sides. Of course, all things being relative to the market. Yeah. What I would say about that is, like I mentioned, we have a group of really loyal, high level supporters, right? Mm-hmm. A small group. And I think it's important for all of us to say it's all relative. Like the money they give is meaningful to them, right? And the money you give is meaningful to you. It's a percentage of kind of what everybody has. And we can't just rest on our laurels knowing, hey, those guys got us. I don't look at that as like a permanent commitment. I think we've had a loyal group of guys basically saying, hey, as you get this off the ground, I'll be here to kind of support you and make sure that we have a little bit of a foundation here. But they want to see the commitment of our program, of our players, of our coaches, our former players, and obviously all of our alums to step up and do it too. And so to answer your question, I would say both programs as we stand right now are in a really good spot, but we need to grow and get better across the board, on the court, the way we practice, the way we do everything, the way we recruit, and the way we do NIL. Everything needs to grow. If we get static or we rest on any laurels, that's not going to work here. We'll get passed up.
in terms of decision making, a couple of comments have been coming in that have asked kind of similar questions on this from our listeners right now live. Is there a like, how does it all work in terms of player personnel choices, like what we're looking for? Does the collective kind of stay out of that process? Is the collective engaged in that process? Do you have these large donors who commit a lot of funds? Do they put their opinion in their process, or is there a little bit of an understanding of like, hey, like keep it, let the basketball people do the basketball things and let the fundraising people do the fundraising things? Or is that a little bit of like a delicate balance to work through?
It's a great question, a really important one. I would say in terms of just 1,000-foot view, big picture, decision-making, nothing will change here. The head coach will always have final say in decision-making on recruiting and who we take and who we want to retain and all those things. So the roster is at the discretion of the head coach with obvious input from his staff. And that goes for evaluating and identifying players as well. I think it's different at different places across the country. Our collective, and I mean, Randy Foy is Big East Player of the Year, a lottery pick, knows a lot about basketball, understands like these guys grind in small gyms over hours of tape. They're doing it every day. So he's not trying to barge in and have a say in that. I think our guys want his feedback on certain guys, to be honest. I mean, he's so valuable in that way. But in general, really trusting those guys to do their job. And then it's the same thing when it comes to our donors. We don't have anybody saying like, hey, I'm not on board. We're not taking that kid because I don't think he's good at this. Like, none of our people are wired that way. I would say we are wired in a way that we're so appreciative of their support. We feel like we owe them some information and some clarity because it is an investment for them in terms of where's the program going, what is the priorities to the staff in terms of how we want to play or what skill sets are needed on the roster. So those guys would never ask permission or we would never feel like needing permission of them to recruit a certain player. But at the same time, I think, the coaching staff feels so, aligned with them and grateful to them that there needs to be information flowing out of here to those guys because, it's the right thing to do.
I had one.
Yeah, really.
And this kind of dives a little bit deeper into that. So when we're looking at, there's like the two funnels of recruiting. There's your high school recruiting, and then there's the transfer portal and NIL and all that stuff. Does that process kind of flow in the way of, okay, we have targeted a transfer, and I'm actually be curious to understand like what that transfer recruiting process looks like without getting into any names or specifics. Like, is that something that starts ahead of time or after, or is that going on during the season? But essentially, is that conversation, like how quickly does that funnel to the Friends of Nova NIL conversation? Or is it always, hey, we're talking basketball first, and then we'll see where that goes? And I'd imagine, ideally, from a Villanova standpoint, if it goes straight to NIL, that might tell you a little bit of something about the player and what their goals might be. And yeah, but I'll let you kind of take that.
No, you get it. I mean, you exactly said it, right? So at the forefront of us being able to get good players over the last, Villanova's gotten great players forever. Yeah. As my father-in-law who played here would tell you, we were making Final Fours in the 1930s. So it's not like the programs come out of nowhere. This place has been amazing for a long time. And the reason for that is we get good players. But I do think there's been a priority since, especially like around like 2013, to really do background and character analysis, not only on the player, but the people around them and their willingness to support our coaches through tough times. So that's always been a big part of it. It still will be. I shouldn't say easier, but it's a simpler process when you recruit high school players because you recruit them over the course of probably most guys 2.5 years.
Yep.
So transfer recruiting is like speed dating. I mean, it really is. You got to get to know these guys quickly. I think we really feel comfortable most times when we recruit somebody if we have a mutual connection who has either coached them before or been around them before. We really got to get validation that obviously it's the staff's job to be able to recognize talent, number one. I mean, the talent is first and foremost. But after that, we gotta measure or predict improvement, and improvement happens based on a few things. Being a self-starter, being focused, being disciplined, being coachable, being humble enough to take instruction and not think you got all the answers. So that's the stuff we got to dig into in like a 2-3 week process, as opposed to 2-3 years.
Yep.
And then the part you did a great job laying it out. And then the part you also have now is you got high school recruiting, you have transfer recruiting, and then you recruit your own roster every year. You recruit from within your own roster for the retention that we mentioned before.
So I guess talking a little bit about current events, for the men's and women's side, I know we've seen decisions come in, and I'm not suggesting that all the decisions have been made public yet. But in your shoes, from the GM role, both men's and women's, are you aware of where everyone's at right now, or is there still uncertainty? Understanding that there's guys who are entering the draft who could theoretically come back. Excluding that, are you aware of where everyone's at the moment, or is there still uncertainty out there where you're still waiting on a particular player or multiple players to kind of report back that they're locked and loaded and ready to go for next year?
Yeah, I think our staff is aware of where everybody is right now, and where some guys are is uncertain. And
Okay.
so, what I mean? Like, and that's just the honest truth is, you have some guys who are locked and loaded, ready to come back. You have some guys who've told you they're leaving. And then, like a guy like Mark Armstrong right now is in a process of like, hey, my dream is to go to the NBA. I want to get feedback and kind of feel out what an NBA process looks like. If for some reason I got some feedback that I could get drafted, I have to think about that. Like, his mind is there. Eric Dixon's thinking about being a pro. We have different guys that are still trying to get on that same page as the head coach about what my role looks like next year and how we're going to do things, and coaching staff making sure that they're on board with the way they see it, right? And that's not a bad thing. Again, I come back to it. The success is the mindsets that are aligned in June, whether that's through new players who are honestly recruited and clearly recruited in terms of expectation, or through retaining players who, let's face it, like when you do a freshman year at a place and then you come back to be a sophomore, you're a different person. Your view of yourself as a player is different. The coach's view of you is different. And that's automatic. It's automatically going to be different. But do you share that viewpoint? Can you get on the same page as what it needs to be? Sometimes the answer to that is yes. And sometimes it's no. So that's not always necessarily a negative. It's just the main negative is when you sell somebody on something that you don't believe in just to get them back, or vice versa. And then you end up with a mistrust for a whole season. That's really, really dangerous and something we got to avoid.
Has that been a learning from this past year? Is that like that last process, or are you guys still like, hey, like we did everything, we did the right things, and we got to fix the product on the court through on-court coaching and performance, or is there a feel that maybe with some of the commitments that we've made this past year, like that we maybe learned a little bit from that exercise? We
got to learn from it. It would be unwise to explain that, hey, you know what, we did a great job. Everything was perfect. We just got to get more luck and, just keep doing what we're doing. We got to be evolving. And I would say that if we won 25 games, we have to evolve. We got to improve every facet of the program, improve what our strengths, and then certainly address what were weaknesses. I think for us, where I'd say the strengths were the guys that we brought in through the portal last year, and this is very difficult to do. I think every one of our staff members enjoyed working with those guys the whole year. We had really, really good buy-in from those guys as far as just people and their families. So where there were shortcomings, those will probably be more attributed to like we just couldn't get everybody together on a basketball sense by the end, like we probably should have and thought we could, or like we did at times during the year. But man, we had good guys, really good guys. So we got to keep doing that, but then evaluate like, all right, from a basketball sense, where can we tweak this to make sure that it's more like cohesive? So
as I'm sitting here today, there is some news breaking on Twitter that it's a great day to be a Wildcat. So I've heard that's, I know you can't say names and we can't necessarily break that, but I think there might be some good diner spots that might be of interest to us in the future. But with that being said, I saw Kyle Neptune tweeted that it's a great day to be a Wildcat. I guess maybe getting at that from a portal perspective, like, is there, like you said, hey, we're still Villanova, we still have a great sell. Is that has that gotten harder? Honestly, like over the last, obviously, like we've heard from former players and like, I just want to play for Jay Wright. And like that, you get that. And like anytime you're going to have a transition from Jay to anybody, you're going to have that. Has it gotten a little bit harder given the 2 consecutive NIT berths with candidly a coach who didn't have a lot of experience coming into the job? Has that process gotten harder, or do you feel like we have our recruiting message and our recruiting message still resonates? And if so, what is that message?
Yeah, I mean, at first it would be, again, I don't want to deal from a unrealistic perspective. Is it harder for Kyle to recruit the program right now than it was for Jay at the end? Of course, we all know that for obvious reasons. Not even due to making the NIT. It's just Coach Wright is a top 5 basketball coach of all time. So that goes out being said. But what I can tell you again is we'll learn more after this whole recruiting cycle this year. But man, I mean, what the Villanova name, brand, and tradition does, and then our coaching staff's work ethic, personality, and relationships, what it does in terms of getting indoors is still super effective. And we're not getting shut out of conversations, that's for sure. And I think a lot of really good players are just beginning the process of taking visits, not making decisions. You guys mentioned we had a commitment today. That's pretty unusual to be able to get a commitment that quickly and this early in the cycle. I think we're excited about that. That's a great indicator, especially when you're able to get players with multiple years left of eligibility. One thing I'm personally excited about is like our high school class coming in, guys that we feel like at least a couple of those guys super ready to contribute, and then you add another young player with multiple years. It's like, right, that feels the way it should in terms of guys coming up in the program. Knowing we got to get some older guys as well, but that there's that balance a little bit of the roster. Obviously, our roster was very veteran and senior heavy this year, without a ton of young guys kind of like coming up from within the program. So we still want this thing to feel like a player development program, a program that evolves year to year with some familiar guys, knowing that, okay, we're going to lose guys every once in a while. We still want it to be that way and use the portal as a tool to plug. But this will, again, be an off season where we got to replace bodies. And we're not going to allow ourselves to be a team of all freshmen. We know that's not a proven model. So where do you want to go from there? Well, we're going to get some transfers. But the main job is to make sure that the transfers that we get understand, Villanova, the university, and kind of what our program needs to be. And again, just wear out the word alignment, but just that everybody's on the same page.
Is there a expectation set delivered to the coaching staff? Like, hey, we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and between the collective and with all the help that we can provide from every angle of recruiting, is there an expectation set to the coaching staff at the beginning of the year that says, here's your bogey and you got to hit that? Obviously understanding that there's challenges that are foreseen and unforeseen that happen throughout a season. But is there like an expectation set? And then, obviously I would imagine that, well, you tell me, but if the expectations were not hit this past year, what's the conversation? What have the conversations been like, within the Davis Center about that, both this year and going into next year?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's an important one. I think if we had to have those specific expectations set, we probably are in the wrong spot. I think we understand what those are here. Those have been developed over time. This is an NCAA tournament program. Kyle and his staff will be the first one to tell you that. It's not it's just the postseason. That's not our goal here. As long as we play hard, they're very realistic, and we understand that expectations have not been met the last couple of years. That said, I think at Villanova more than anywhere, it is more important the way things look, the way things happen, the way the players interact together on the court, the effort with which they play. So I think it's twofold. It's that kind of subjective piece of it, in terms of like, does this look and feel like, not necessarily Coach Wright's Villanova. It doesn't need to be exactly there, but does it make us proud? Does it make us proud that we're watching? I think we hit that mark for moments this year. I think for certain moments we did not, right? And then from a tangible, objective standpoint, are we competing for championships? I mean, that's what we want to do at Villanova across the board in all of our programs, especially men's and women's basketball. Are we competing for championships? This year, the answer to that was no. So we're falling short of what we want to do. We just so happen to believe at Villanova competing for championships happen when you do all the little things right. And so that's what we got to evaluate this offseason. Like, it doesn't lie in one answer. It's not because of one player. It's, all right, what of those little things need to be addressed? Multiple things. How do we make a huge step in those? And those are the questions being evaluated by our staff every day.
On the basketball front, so like, we don't have to get into specific plays and X's and O's and what have you, but it was clear that the defense was kind of, I'd venture a guess that you probably felt that while there were moments, but on balance, the defense was, hit the mark for your marks for a championship program. But offensively, we were challenged on the men's side this past season. I don't think that's breaking news to anybody.
Yep.
Is the effort being made in the portal geared towards correcting that, or is there another angle that we're playing?
Absolutely. I think, you mentioned the defense first. We were a top 15 defense nationally in terms of efficiency. I was worried about that, to be honest, early in the year. Thought our staff did a really good job adapting. I won't go into the technical aspects of it, but really using our length as a team to contain the ball, contest, and rebound. We ranked really high in defensive rebounding as well. So I say that only to say, like, the first thing we evaluate are our players bought in, do they play hard? And so it's hard to be a top 20 defensive and rebounding team nationally if your teams aren't bought into playing hard. I feel like most of the year our guys played hard for our coaching staff and for the name on the front of the jersey. Obviously, offensively, we need to evaluate not one thing but multiple things in terms of why we didn't perform offensively as well as we're used to. Sometimes the simplest answers are the right ones. I think you guys, could probably say some of the things I'm about to say, but we were a very average shooting team this year from three. I think we probably had slightly better shooters than we showed, but for whatever reason, we did not. We took a high volume of threes, as we always do, but we made a very average amount of those. What goes into that isn't just the type of shooters you have, but the type of plays you're making. Are you drawing to and making good decisions and kicking and throwing that extra pass we're used to? I think our staff would say, hey, we didn't get enough of that elite decision making we're used to offensively. Hey, with transfers, are we going to be able to teach that as quickly as we used to? Or are we going to need to maybe set that up for these guys a little bit more? So I'm sure our fans are thinking that way. I know our staff is thinking that way. And also we had good guards, but we were thin at the guard position. It was a lot to ask of Justin and Mark to kind of be the only traditional ball handling guards on this team and really carry that. I should probably throw Jordan Langino in that mix as well as kind of like a bigger guard who can do those things. All of those guys battled injuries a little bit. We didn't always have those guys consistently, but we need to be a program, and we've always been a program that's had a depth in the backcourt, old and young, to where we can play guards together. And we were probably just a little thin, not in terms of quality, but just in terms of numbers when it comes to that. So that's definitely an emphasis this offseason.
It seems like Kyle is a defensive-minded coach. Like the in-the-huddle segments are kind of one of the only things that you get. But even in his commentary to the media, he's definitely defensively focused. There's a lot of conversation around we control what we can control, which oftentimes speak to defensive intensity.
And even
but I guess
Fordham, even at Fordham was a pretty good defense when it's
there. But is there a conversation internally around like staff mix, like in terms of assistant coaches and other people on the staff to say, hey, can we get an offensive minded guy in here to help Kyle? Or is your evaluation that Kyle knows that stuff and can teach that stuff? and it's just a matter of emphasis, or is it truly just personnel, or is it all the above?
I think personnel is number one. And then how we use that personnel is number two. What goes into using that personnel? It's up to Kyle to decide whether to delegate. I think Mike Nardi does an awesome job with us in terms of understanding where the program has been offensively, and kind of he's a really, really good on-court teacher. I think we have really good mix of guys on the staff that complement each other well. That said, I know if there's opportunities to improve our staff in terms of addition to our staff, I don't think Kyle's afraid of that. I think he's really one of his greatest strengths is his willingness and openness to delegate and take help and take different opinions, and at the end of the day go with his gut. But he listens to everybody, and he understands where to go for certain information, and he's humble enough to seek that, as opposed to just being taking it all on himself and not really taking in that information. I do think defense is a strength of his. If you look at what they did at Fordham in 1 year, turn that program around by getting stops and just locking people up in that league. I think he's got a really good mind for it, and I think that'll continue to be a strength going forward here.
Okay. So I guess just one question, getting off the court a little bit and into kind of like how the basketball program interacts with the fan base. I think we said it up front before you jumped on. Like, I think this is good. This is helping. But I feel like there's been a little bit of, hey, the hey, just play 40 minutes of Villanova basketball, do what we do, that type of response to media questions when you're winning, which has been, is kind of like Derek Jeter-esque, where it's like, hey, like Yankees fan growing up. So like Derek Jeter would famously, almost comically, not answer questions. And it was kind of like the same thing that we had going there in the 2010 period. Play Villanova basketball for a full 40 minutes. And we named the podcast as a result of it. So like, I feel like that's
brainwashed too.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I guess it rings a little bit more hollow when the wins aren't what they were. Has there been internal dialogue on how we are engaging with the fan base and making this place maybe a little bit more fun for the fans, and fans feel like they have a little bit more transparency with the program? Has that been a dialogue?
Absolutely, and I think that's a fair assessment. It's funny, like this has been a program that can feel through the players very robotic, and scripted. The cool thing about it is the guys, while they're here, early on when they're freshmen, they're basically told, this is how we talk, this is what we say, this is what we do. You become us, we don't become you. That's a thing here, right? But then over time, it actually becomes them, and they believe in it, and they feel themselves successful. It's like, all right, you know what? This is what we do, and I actually believe this. And I'm a little bit of a robot in that way. But what made up for that was Coach Wright. I think Coach Wright at his heart is he's a marketing PR guy. He's a people person. He would make an effort to really cover for that. Like the guys can be somewhat muted. They can be very simple. I'll be the outward facing entity here and cover for all those things myself a little bit. And I don't even know how conscious he was of like that's the way it was going to go, but it is the way it was. And now to have a new coach come in here who is just drinking out of a fire hose, for a lack of a better term, in recruiting, building rosters, managing how we're going to play, doing everything. Like, we need to do a better job of assisting him and getting him in front of the camera, on podcasts, on in the right formats, on campus, even just on campus. And he knows that, right? And so when you get a new job and things are moving a million miles an hour, you prioritize. Obviously, nobody's more committed to being in the office and working his butt off than Kyle and his staff. And I think it is time to probably take some of those more external steps. And so there's, and rightfully so, I think there's, whether we were winning this year, we won 30 games, some of the nature to the way we answer questions here and the way we talk, I think there would still be skeptics out there saying like, wait, that's the way they did it for Jay. Like, why is it still the same? There's a new coach here. There's a new, like, are they just copying him? There's always going to be those kind of skeptical opinions, and they're not wrong. It's fair. But I do think identities have to develop. And I think that applies to on the court and off, but all that is driven by the head coach. And I think all of us can do a better job in making sure that we feel way more open as a program, relatable, in our way, though. I mean, we're never going to be at Villanova the type of place that, feels, I should say, like, inauthentic, and very, like, hype driven. That's just not what we've been. We've been simple. We've been direct. It's our brand. We're about, it's a serious culture, guys, like this. And we say this to recruits all the time. There are places, I'm not going to name names, but there are places you can go and the pitch is fun, right? It's come in here, be loose, be you, do your thing. That's the pitch. And it's kind of, it's not quite that way when recruits get there. I promise you that. Coaches change that tune real quick when October comes, but it's more geared that way. That's never been how we are under Coach Wright, or what I've experienced at Villanova. It's, we work, we do things in a very, very calculated fashion here that we believe leads to improvement. And when you improve and you win and you have success, that's fun. When your teammate is better because of what you're doing and you see his growth because of you, that's fun. And if you don't evaluate fun that way, then it's going to be hard for you to reach your potential. So it's just the truth. It's just who we've been. But that said, we need to translate that more into being a little bit more interactive and open. And we admit that. We understand that.
Yeah, so just kind of picking up with, I mean, you hit on a few of the points that I was going to bring up. And I mean, we talk about the program isms. I'm wearing a t-shirt that says attitude. And just talking about how making Villanova basketball a fun place, and how you said seeing the improvement, seeing the winning plays, the right decision making, that kind of stuff is fun on the court perspective. And you said there's schools that we won't name, or that you won't name. I'm going to name some schools, but that we see on social media, like places like Providence, places like UConn. I don't know how engaged you are with it. Like, we live on Twitter, so we see how crazy and ravenous they are towards any little thing that happens within the program.
Providence just raised like a ton of NIL dollars by selling a vest.
Yeah. Which is, it's funny. It's something they make fun of us for, but now they're the ones wearing vests.
I was going to say, I think we tried that first.
Yeah. So we see what your perspective of what fun is as a coach, as a general manager, as somebody within the program. But how do you think that, kind of getting Kyle out there and everything could kind of make it more of a fun place for the fans? Like we said, like, I don't know who was having a ton of fun this year. I had a bunch of fun in November. And then it kind of was like hit or miss, obviously, with the team success. But even when there's tougher situations on the court, do you see a path to kind of build a more fun environment for us as fans, to kind of keep us engaged? Because, whether or not the team's winning, like we said, we have to keep the contributions up. We have to keep the investment going. And part of that is to kind of create an environment where people feel, regardless of what's happening on the court, like I said, we don't have to really talk about that. It can be in a place that we can have fun with it and experience that joy, whether or not it's a championship season.
Yeah, it's hard for me because I can't speak from your perspective. I shouldn't say that. I'm a fan as well.
Right.
I root for our teams. I was gone for 6 years, watching Villanova and rooting for them, so I am a fan. I look at it from a little bit of a different lens, but I would say the thing that's driven us here maybe isn't like traditional fun, but pride. I mean, I think like what we've seen as fans, as alums, is something we've just been incredibly proud of. And some of those years correlated to championships, some of them didn't. But I just go back to like the way our guys represent the university and they go about things is really, really fun, And now you see Jalen and Josh doing their goofy podcast, like maybe that's a great example. It's like, hey, Why couldn't those guys do that if they did that while they were at Villanova? That would have been amazing.
Yeah,
wouldn't have worked. I feel like it wouldn't have
But
gotten
it's a great example. Like, but you see guys at different programs really investing their time in that.
Right.
It's just not the way we look at it. It's like we always talk about how we appreciate players and their families coming in here and sacrificing to align themselves with our values. And then when you leave here, you've got a little bit of imprint of Villanova, the university and the program on you. And then you go out as an individual into the world. And every time Mikal Bridges makes a three, he's like shooting threes at people, like that was not happening here. But we're proud as hell of him, and he's doing it his own way now. And a lot of the things he does, you can see at Villanova. And then he's also pivoted into his own little, his personality. So we want our guys to have a personality. Don't get me wrong. We want our guys to be able to express themselves. I think probably, like Coach Neptune has allowed these guys pre-practice. We have music on in the gym, that never has happened before. We're evolving. It's just we're always going to lean more basic, traditional, and we really feel like that gets it done. But then if that's what you rest your laurels on and that's only what you do and you're afraid to evolve, you're going to get left behind. So, I think that's where we all have a responsibility to say, hey, this has worked for us, but we got to change. And nothing is off the table when it comes to that, especially the stuff you guys are talking about. So, we're open to suggestions, but we're always, evaluating on how we can be better in all aspects.
You kind of hit on that pride thing and just as a greater conference conversation, like we all, grew up and love, quote, the old Big East, the new Big East, whatever iteration you want to call it. I feel like this year in particular, the Big East has won 4 of the last 8 national championships. The conference pride is at an all-time high, but nationally, whether it be, through the TV deal that I know you have nothing to, like, I don't know if the schools have any input at this stage or if it's just the conference that kind of takes lead on that. But we saw only 3 teams in the tournament this year. There was a big backlash essentially about that. And, commissioners come out and had their statements. You saw the associate commissioner tweeting during the national championship games about X, Y, and Z. Is there a worry that the Big East is kind of, despite its dominance on a national stage, national championships, Sweet 16s, second weekends, Elite Eights the year before, are we worried that, we're seeing the Big East, Big 12 battle is canceling or not renewing after this season? We had the same thing with someone correct me if I'm wrong, but the Gavitt games, are those ending?
Yeah, the Gavitt games are done.
Is there, a dialogue between schools about like, hey, we're kind of, from a fan's perspective, it kind of feels like they're trying to squeeze us out. Them being the national stage and ESPN and all that, and we know the history there. But is there a conversation about, we are so good at what we do and producing basketball, men's and women's, across both sides? What's the play here for kind of maintaining that conference pride and direction over the next few years? I know there's a new TV deal in the works and all that, but do you have any insight to that? Yeah,
a good thought. I think a lot of this would tempt me to get into the weeds on scheduling and NCAA tournament resumes, which is a big part of my role here. But like, I'll spare you of all that. I would start by saying the long-term concern or play is where you'd be like, hey, we don't have football, so we're going to be at the discretion of these leagues that drive it, that have football. We know that. The best chance we have to be really relevant long-term is to be great at basketball. We know that as well. In the meantime, we do look at being a basketball school and a basketball conference as an advantage. The trend is downward in terms of teams in the tournament. Hey, at Villanova, we understand we have a part in that. We didn't earn our way in. The NCAA tournament is used to having Villanova, and we weren't there. So that's number one. And then I think if you look at this year, you would say, hey, Seton Hall should have been in there. That was a mistake. I think we can all see that Seton Hall should have been in. They were probably a team that could have threatened into the second weekend. In terms of the optics of how they were playing at the end of the year, we know from playing against them. the problem, guys, is you can't leave yourself on the bubble. You just in this age where so many teams are competing, and right now it's at 68. Like you can't put yourself in that position. And we know why we were there. Seton Hall knows why they were there. And as the St. John's, you have to have the number of quad one. Just reps. You got to get games in the quad one, and you can't lose bad games. And so there's a reason. There's a reason as to why some of the teams on the bubble did not get in from our league. We could have our comparison games, whether this team should have got in or not, but we got to do a better job of just keeping ourselves off the bubble. We played 11 quad one games in the Big East this year. That's really, really, really good, right? That's a high number. That's a really good indicator, right? You want to play like 12, 13 quad one games a year if you want to be in that mix to get in the tournament. We're almost satisfying all of that in our league. The hope is that'll stay the same, right? That everybody will maintain a quad one status with how well they play throughout the year. I don't know. You look at the teams in our league that have traditionally been a little bit down the last, 5, 6, 8 years. They're all getting better. You look at from the St. John's to now to Paul hiring, Coach Holtman, who's a proven winner. You just go down the list. There's nowhere to hide in this league. It's a great league. I think getting 3 teams in is a one-off personally, but we also aren't. Again, we're not just taking it for granted. We're figuring out as a league how we can continue to drive this thing upward. Fox has been a really good partner for us. If you evaluate the metrics and our deal with them, and also some of the viewership, especially on Big Fox. It's been successful. I think Val Ackerman's been a great leader for the league. So we got to evaluate where we can do things better. But we're lucky to be in a league where if you're doing the right things in the non-conference, if you just do well, that if you're above 500 in this league, you should be getting into a tournament. And we had some non-conference issues last year with some of our teams, including us.
So Baker, on the women's side of things, so we just talked about how the men's with the Big East and how that's affecting everything. On the women's side, obviously I think we had 4 transfers hitting the portal. Marquette's had a couple of transfers. DePaul's had some. Have there been conversations between Villanova and the Big East, and Villanova and Friends of Nova, and how we kind of make sure that the Villanova women's basketball product remains competitive, and not just because what we see is in the Big East. Obviously, UConn is the flagship. Gino's great. Everything's happening there. Cool. UConn's great. But it seems to be there's UConn and then everybody else. How are we working with the Big East to make sure that it's promoted properly to ensure the conference outside of UConn can be competitive year in and year out? Because there's great women playing basketball. We saw Lucy, but I think if you asked your average fan, did anyone who knew that Lucy was the 3rd leading scorer in women's basketball, people wouldn't know that. So is that conversation something we're having? And what are some of those challenges we face beyond just NIL and keeping the program competitive and at the forefront?
Yeah, we have the conversations, of course, and it hurts, again, immensely to lose Lucy. But in general, I personally would evaluate that program as something that's trending in a very positive way for us.
Yeah.
Based on, looking year over year and then looking, over the last 20 years, it's going in the right direction. You just show up to a women's game. Again, that's one of those things I come back to now. It's amazing. The crowds, the support, just the vibe in there is awesome. Again, I think Denise is still early in her tenure here, and she's going to establish herself as one of the best coaches on the women's side in NCAA, and still lose players to the transfer portal just because that's the way it is, right? But I think we need to continue to find creative ways to promote our programs from a Villanova perspective.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, from a Big East perspective. Can we find a bigger TV platform for our women over time? I think we can. Can we be more creative in how we promote them? One of the best things to happen was this last year's NCAA tournament and Final Four. The attention that women's sports is getting in general, it'll continue to trickle down to Villanova women's basketball in our own community. It's already started, and I think it'll only get stronger because it's a team sport at the end of the day. And, it's not about one player. It's about the program. And I think that's a program that, again, it's just on an ascent.
Cool. Yeah. Well, Baker, we know that we have you until 1. And I think that we've hit a lot of what we wanted to chat with you about. I guess, is there anything from your end, in the last couple minutes here, is there anything from your end that you wanted to share, promote, whatever it may be, that's important to you, that you want our fans to hear?
Yeah, that's what this is right now. Is just try and kind of spend some time hanging with you guys, but really it's directed at our fan base. Is just from our vantage point, just that they understand, like, we don't have a lot of direct answers right now through like player acquisition. When you lose players, it happens quickly, and you get into a panic, and it's concerning, as it should be. The losses come quick, and then it takes a while to accrue the wins. So our staff is we'll have a commitment today. We'll have a visit tomorrow. We're going to have visits lined up. They'll accrue some wins over time, and that's a tricky part about this time of year. In no way, shape, or form do we want our fans and our supporters feeling like, hey, everybody here feels like we had it in a great spot this year. We just got unlucky. Absolutely not. This thing, our tradition, what we're responsible for here in terms of honoring that tradition and that legacy is a big deal. And we need the results to be better. Everybody here takes it incredibly seriously. And what our fans see and support is the most important thing to us as an administration and our coaching staff as well. So it's really that simple. I wish I could just list you 10 things that we're going to be better next year, but a lot of that is driven by what your roster looks like, and it takes time. But everybody's working hard. Everybody understands there needs to be a different a result out there next year, and there's a lot of still humility when it comes to that, understanding it needs to be that way, and still a ton of pride being taken internally here that we got to go make that happen.
No, thanks, Baker. Thanks for that. I mean, you can give us the list of 10 things. We'll just hold you accountable, check it off one by one. As we go.
Get in the lane and kick it a few more times as opposed to taking tough twos.
There we go.
Those are the things our staff, we've been
jump
honestly, I mean, the time we get with these guys in the summer and getting them in here as soon as possible, new players, is incredibly valuable. And I think evaluating how soon we get them in, what we work on when, how we train these guys, what we leave to the side and say, hey, we used to try and be great at that. That's probably not attainable anymore. We need to shift this. There's a lot of learning on the fly going on right now, and it has to be that way for multiple reasons. It's just we gotta hit a moving target here.
I think the last question I'll ask is actually just, do you have an example of one of the things that we're thinking about leaving on the side that we're like, all right, that's not something. That was just a really good point. I'm curious about that. And if there's not an example of it still being evaluated, that's completely fine.
Listen, I would say big picture.
Yeah.
We've been really, really stringent on everybody uses the same fundamentals here, right? So Jalen Brunson, hey, congratulations on your McDonald's All-American high school career, but now that you're at Villanova, you catch the ball like this, right? Yeah. You step into your – I'm serious. You step into your –
I know. I love it, though. It's right? Like, it's great.
And so now it's, hey, transfer X. You've had 4 years of high school and now 4 years playing for a college coach. Maybe like Hakeem Hart played for 3 college coaches at Maryland.
Yeah.
He played for Mark Turgeon. He played for Danny Manning when Mark was let go. And he played for Kevin Willard. It's not like that kid had any control over that. But 3 different sets of instruction now coming into Villanova. Let's not evaluate that as a negative or a positive. It's just reality. How do you manage that? Hakeem's a really smart, instinctive basketball player. But to ask him to learn how to change all those fundamentals in a span of 3 months may not be accomplishable, right? But making sure that he understands this is what we expect as the end result. Like, take care of the ball. When 2 guys are on you, you got to pass the ball. Here, that's been a bounce pass. Your instinct is to throw a chest pass. Okay. I'm not saying we get rid of that. I'm just saying it's something we got to think about.
Yeah. Baker, that's a really great answer. I think that gives a lot of people a lot of insight into how we're thinking about things. I know we're wrapping up and we're hitting time here. So wanted to thank you so much for your time, for hopping on the podcast with us. We have like a lot of listeners on. I'm sure it's been super valuable for them. I've seen the comments roll in. So really thankful for your time and glad that you're able to join us here. And for the rest of us here, we're going to figure out. We always don't know when we're going to go live, but we're going to have one more episode at least. We have to say goodbye to Chris. We have to do the 40s. There'll be a lot of stuff coming. We'll also probably have a conversation about some of the portal gets and what happens there. So stay tuned for us. But once again, Baker, thank you so much for your time. That's all we got, everybody. And as always, let's go Nova.
Thanks, guys.